At a recent event on Monday night in Iowa, Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders decided he would go after the defense contractor industry. Let's take a look at that.
This is an interesting story, ironic story. The day before 9/11, I think it was September 10th, 2001, some guy who I had nothing in common with, Donald Rumsfeld, then Secretary of Defense, okay, he gave a speech. And he said that there are trillions of dollars in the Department of Defense that we cannot account for. That was Rumsfeld. That was the day before 9/11. That speech never got a whole lot of attention. Okay? Right now, the Department of Defense, to the best of my knowledge, is the only agency of government that cannot sustain an independent audit. So if you go to them and say, okay, how many private contractors do you have? Well, we really don't know. We can't tell you. It's so complicated. It's a huge, complicated system. So I believe that when we talk about making government cost-effective and protecting taxpayers, it doesn't simply mean cutting Medicaid and food stamps. What it does mean is taking a hard look at an agency which receives about $600 billion a year, where there is an enormous amount of waste and fraud. And the other side of the equation is that while there's massive cost overruns for defense contractors, we got deployment after deployment for our soldiers, and we have military families getting food stamps. So maybe we want to change those priorities. How's that?
So yes, audit the Department of Defense. Absolutely. He's absolutely right. Look, a great example of why it needs to be audited for the waste and fraud. Look at waste. Look at one of the biggest examples of waste is the F-35, a plane that still can't reliably fly. That's cost taxpayers at least $1.5 trillion. It costs so much and performs so little that even John McCain, Mr. Warhawk himself, in 2013 called the cost overruns of the F-35, quote, a national disgrace. And in more recent statements, he had said, quote, the Joint Strike Fighter is the most expensive weapons system in history, and we must learn the lessons of past failures to ensure that taxpayer dollars are spent efficiently and American aviators can safely and effectively perform their missions. So there's John McCain. You got to look at all the money that's being poured into this plane that can really hardly even shoot its gun, much less fly. And this is all while Bernie Sanders rightly points out that, look, $84 million in food stamps were spent at military commissaries in 2014. We have servicemen and women that are on food stamps. And yet you've got the government spending $1.5 trillion on a plane that doesn't work. And according to USDA data, it's estimated that in 2012, more than 1.5 million veterans had to use food stamps. Now that's about 7% of all veterans. Still, that's a huge number. And maybe some of those veterans look at that and go, well, I don't want to take from the system, so I'm not going to go and get food stamps, even though I might be eligible. So you also have to look at that. So there may be a lot of veterans that actually aren't accounted for. Well, what's going on is that we spend more on our military than the next 28 countries combined. But unfortunately, it's all going for for-profit defense contractors. And that's the biggest issue here. And barely any of it actually goes to pay our troops, our soldiers on the ground. And that's a goddamn travesty. And ironically, the one program that Republicans seek to keep pumping money into without any sort of accountability, the military. I'm talking about the military, not the food stamp program. They want to keep putting more and more money into the military without even, accounting to where it's going. Talk about waste, fraud, and abuse. A lot of this money is going to end up going right into the pockets of defense contractor CEOs, or being lost at a pallet somewhere in Iraq. Look, we've got to take a look at where the military is spending our money. Any other government program gets scrutinized, looked at, picked apart, and sometimes even taking a hatchet to when it comes to the Republicans. But somehow, the military seems to escape all of this. And you can blame a lot of this on Republican politicians. Also, you can also blame Democrats on this as well, because they go along with this. And a lot of it has to do with the idea that if somehow you're not for the Pentagon having carte blanche when it comes to spending, when it comes to money, that you're somehow against the troops. That's a bullshit argument. Because really, being against the troops is actually ignoring the fact that they don't actually get paid enough to defend our country. While people like the former CEO of Raytheon, a defense contractor, a man that goes by the name of William Swanson, made about $16.4 million in total compensation in the year 2012 alone. That's amazing. Being against the troops is not paying for adequate funding for veterans or for the VA. Not putting funding and putting in the infrastructure and trying to fix the problems of the VA. All of that is not being for the troops. But somehow giving Raytheon or, I can't think of the other one. All the other defense contractors, giving them millions, billions of dollars in defense contracts, sometimes no bid contracts. That is somehow supporting the troops. That's ridiculous. Look, in calling to audit the Pentagon, Bernie Sanders is showing that not only does he care about the budget, but also about the troops. And I'd love to see any of the other candidates make the same kind of commitment to our fighting men and women.